It was February 15th, and it was a month or so before Bush and Blair were to send troops into Iraq. And there was a massive turnout against the war in England. Because in England, the press is a little bit more open than it is here. Over here, we got the war drums beating. In England, you had different points of view expressed in the news media. But what turned out on that day surprised me, and I think it surprised everyone. It was historic because it was the largest demonstration in the history of that country. 1.5 million to 2 million people marched in Hyde Park, and I swear to God, you can look out into the horizon and all you would see is human bodies. I've never seen that before. I'll probably never see it again. But the British people marched nearly 2 million strong against the war, and Blair didn't listen to that. Well, Bush didn't either. The man responsible for mobilizing labor and having the speakers there was Bob Crow. Bob gave me the honor of speaking at that mass march. Bob is one of the most militant leaders in the British trade union movement. He's one of those guys that's not afraid to stand up and tell it like it is, whether it's against an employer or a government that claims it's for unions just because its name is a Labor Party. In fact, his union found itself thrown out of the Labor Party, so-called Labor Party, I should say. So-called Labor Party. They were thrown out in part because they refused to support the war. They were actively opposed to the war. And his union has been very much in the vanguard of fighting privatization. It's something that came down from Thatcher and continued without batting an eye through Blair. And without further ado, I give you Brother Bob Crow from the RMT.
Well, Comrade Jack, brothers and sisters, it's a pleasure to be here in my delegation. I'm sure later on today our delegation will get stuck into the debate knowing the people they've got there. I did say earlier on that our union is slightly different from other unions in Great Britain. It's an industrial union. And if some of the phraseology that I bring over to you good American brothers and sisters is different to what you're used to, I'll only be too happy to explain that later on. But we're an industrial union, hence we believe in one industry, one union. We don't believe in merging for the sake of merging. There's a lot of unions that merge, and I'm in favour of mergers. We actually merged on September the 10th, 1990, bringing together the National Union of Seafarers and the National Union of Railway Workers together to form the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers. I've got to say that there's a lot of union officials in Great Britain that when they meet, they didn't sit down like we did and said, how would it strengthen workers, how would it improve their pay, their safety, their conditions of work, their job security. The first things that they talk about is what's their expense account going to be? Are they still going to get the same kind of litre car? And what does it mean to them salary-wise? And also what's adopted in Great Britain is what's called business trade unionism. They actually believe in this social partnership. Social partnership, they believe that if you're nice to the employer's nice to you. And that's the reality. Our union, the RMT, has only got the only union in Great Britain that's got a rank and file full-time executive. A lot of unions have got obviously executive committees, but our union are rank and file. In fact, me as the General Secretary and the President of our union, Tony, who's here with us, don't get a vote on the executive. It was only up to around about 35 years ago, and I hope that the Executive Committee members don't bring this back, that they weren't even allowed to sit down while the Executive Committee spoke. I would actually go into a meeting, my predecessors, bring a case to them, and then they would say, you stand up there until we're finished with you, and then you can go. Eventually, one of them weren't too well. We eventually got a chair, and they never took the chair out of the room, and we were entitled to sit down there. But that's what the union was based on, rank and file. Every single official of our union is elected. That's right from the minute taker, the people that put the coats up in the meetings, the branch chairs, the branch secretary, the regional officials, every single one of them are elected, and they're elected for a periodic base. We have no appointing whatsoever of officials in our union. So they're all accountable to each other. And that's the checks and balances. And we find whether people are socialist brand of union official or a militant brand of a union official, we find that the majority of our members, if a person does their job, don't always win, but keeps on punching away, then they get re-elected. Those who don't punch away, they're the ones that get deselected. So I think, brothers and sisters, why we come here to this conference today. See, some people might say, well, a gathering like this in San Francisco, is it really going to change trade unionism and politics? And I would say to people that marching feet make history. People would tell us at that start of the war, and by the way, when we had that demonstration 4 years ago, our union played, with other unions, played a big role in it. It wasn't very popular at the time. I've got to say that leading up to the demonstration, the majority of people in the country was being swayed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction and we should get rid of them. Our union knew a bit different, because in 1990, some 12 years before the war in Iraq, we was actually writing to Thatcher, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, asking her to take action against Saddam Hussein because he was torturing trade unionists and members of the Communist Party in Iraq for carrying out good working class politics. And of course, Saddam Hussein was a friend in 1990 to Thatcher, and all of a sudden he turned into a monster and a Frankenstein, and they couldn't cope with what was going on. So we have to understand, brothers and sisters, what's taking place out there. And I'm not sitting here, some patronising school teacher telling you how hard it is at workplace. But we have to understand that trade union politics will only take you so far. You see, our union actually was expelled from the Labour Party, the new Labour Party under Blair, but we actually formed the Labour Party 106 years ago. We was actually affiliated to a party called the Liberal Party 106 years ago when there wasn't a Labour Party. There were two parties in Britain, the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party. And as a result of that, we affiliated to the Liberal Party because we believed the Liberal Party was the party for working men and working women. And then they recognised the fact, the old trade unionist pioneers, that after they'd been going for 50 or 60 years, that they was getting gains in the workplace, in economic booms, but when the economic slumps started, they took those gains off them. So they recognised that the trade unions can only take you so far. And they needed a clear difference in politics and a fundamental change to society which couldn't be reversed. And therefore they set the Labour Party up. In our rule book, which was put in there 100 years ago, both in the National Union of Seamen side and the National Union of Railmen side, it says this clause. If the CIA are listening, I probably won't make my way back to London. It says that we work for the cessation of the capitalist system and we apply a socialist order of society. That's what's inbuilt in our rule book. No, I didn't put it in there. Our forefathers put it in there 100 years ago. And then what took place was there was a fight between those trade unionists who wanted to carry on supporting the Liberal Party and those trade unionists that wanted to support the question of labour and a socialist orientation to working men and working women. And as a result of that, a split took place and the trade union movement formed the Labour Party. And as a result of that, after the Second World War from 1939 to 1945, what we had was an old programme of a national health system being brought into place, different to the Medicare that you have here, but the money directly taken out of individual people's wage packets and based on what you earn. If you earned money, you paid more, and the more you paid, the more you earn. And the national health system has never been free in Britain. You pay for it when you're working, and you receive it free when you're sick. From the cradle to the grave, at the point of need, was the national health system. They nationalised the railways. They nationalised steel. They nationalised public utilities. But the problem that they fell into was that what basically was being brought in was what's called state capitalism. That they run the railways with the same old privateer bosses that were in place under privatisation and put them in charge of a nationalised industry. And what we actually wanted was full democratic control of the industries. E.g., those people that work in the industry and those people who are consumers for the industry should jointly say how that industry is run. And therefore, we've never seen a socialist concept take place in Great Britain. And of course, to say our trade union movement become very strong. And just to give you a couple of examples about what took place in the British trade union movement. And Tony Nelson, my good mate, and Terry from the T&G, who are very good friends of us, made it quite clear about holding on to what you've got. There was a reality in the trade union movement that we couldn't be defeated, that we was too strong. And in 1978, not too long ago from here, the trade union movement in Britain had 13 million members. I'll just tell you what the density of that was. The density of that was something in the region of 65% of all workers, working population, were in a trade union. In the nationalised public sector industries, 83% of people were in a trade union. But more importantly, the trade unions had agreements with companies, like your contracts that you have, which give a collective agreement for people. So even though there was an industry where people weren't in a trade union, their pay and conditions were regulated by the trade union and the employer, and 83% of workers in Great Britain were covered by a trade union agreement, or contract as you would call it, in the United States. I'll tell you what the figure is now. The figure now is that 91%, that's right, of trade unionists in the private sector are not in a union. Workers are not in a union in Great Britain. In the public sector, it's less than 50%. And we've seen the trade union membership in Great Britain go from 13 million down to 6 million in that period of time. And there's been more privatisation under Blair than there was under Thatcher. But what I can't understand about these trade union leaders in Great Britain today is that we understand that Thatcher and the Conservative Party were our enemies. And you've also got to understand there's an ideologically hatred for working people by big business and the ruling class. Some people seem to think it's your friendly foreman or your supervisor who's the boss. They've just got a name called a foreman or a supervisor. The real people that own and control the industries are the big bosses, the multimedia companies, mass media. They're what you call the real establishment. And they've got an ideological hatred for working people. They don't want working men and working women to get up that ladder and make life better for them. And they want to keep people down. And as a result of that, what we've seen is business trade unionism means that we get our money in from the members and we decide what we're going to use that money for. Campaigning for better pay and conditions is obviously the crucial number thing for trade unionists. Health and safety at the workplace, decent pensions, decent medical care and so on. But also what we argue for is that we understand that we have to change society and you have to have people in Parliament, and you just can't rely on your MPs or your senates to make life better for you. They're the last people to get the message. They will only do things if you put pressure from outside on those individuals. So what we want is a fighting active trade union movement on the outside, a fighting active community on the outside, and decent senates or MPs on the inside carrying out policies on behalf of working men and working women. And we decided, we understood Thatcher hated us, and we decided that we wanted to give money to a political party that was going to fight for us. The Labour Party under Blair was privatising our underground members on London Underground. He was refusing to bring in any kind of protection for our seafaring members, and the Labour Party threw us out of membership. Now I've still got good friends in the Labour Party. We've still got some good MPs that are in the Labour Party. They're not all bad. But I've got to say is that if people don't understand what's taking place out there, is that you've got to look beyond your local street, your local town, your local city, and face up what's taking place. What we're seeing now is that Thatcher and Reagan decided there was going to be a new world order. That new world order would mean was that any industry that's public, that has some kind of democratic structure to it, because you see, when you privatise a public utility, you don't just hand it over to the privateers to make bigger profits. You take away the democratic control of the society to run it. And that's all about strength and power. Because at this moment in time, if you've got a public utility with some kind of local municipal or local town or democratic structure running it, what happens is that you can argue your case and you can say that industry should be run in a different direction. Once you take the industry out of the public sector and hand it to a privateers, the people that run that industry don't run it on the basis do they provide services for the public, they run it for the boardroom people on how big a dividend they can pay the shareholders in the future. So therefore, what takes place is that Reagan then says the Soviet Union is the big problem for the American people and the worldwide people, the evil empire. But what they was basically doing was getting rid of the Soviet Union on the basis that he could open up a market there for people to go in and make even bigger profits. And Tony quite rightly said about Eastern European people coming in to Britain. Well, I've got to say, I ain't got a problem with any Eastern European people, and nor has Tony, by the way, coming into Britain. I ain't bothered. If you look at our history, before it was the Eastern Europeans that was the so-called scapegoat, it was the Asian people. Before the Asian people, it was the Irish. Before the Irish, it was the Jews. So they always want scapegoats into society. Our job is to organise those people and say, whether you're black, you're white, you're a Jew, you're a gay, you get the same job and you get the same pay and conditions that go alongside it. That is what you call equality for people in those industries. And once the Soviet Union was done away with, they're now coming for any pillar that stands in the way of big business. And that pillar is trade unions. Because the trade unions are the regulators for pay and conditions. They're the people that say to the employer, we're not having it. They're the people that say to the employer that we're going to fight back. And that's what they don't want. And of course, I would point out the fact that we had the opportunity to meet the World Bank, not that we could try and convince them that there was some kind of organisation to help working people, but they give us two facts. That 50% of the workers in the world today were working for $2 a day. And 20% of the workers in the world today are working for $1 a day. So now you've got a situation where the employers are saying, why are we going to take someone on, like a longshoreman, on $200, $300, $400 a day, when we can get someone to do the same job for $2 a day? And you haven't got to walk around with a Wall Street Journal in your pocket or the Financial Times to work out what it means. It means that if you're paying $500 a day to someone and you can get the work for $50 a day, where does the $450 go? Straight in the pocket of the employer. So you haven't got to go to Harvard University to pick that information up. That's where it goes. And also in reverse, if you as organised workers take action and get a pay increase, where does the money come from? It comes directly from the boss's profits. So if you can get more wages, it means the boss's profits get smaller. So whoever strongest at any given moment in time is going to win at the workplace. Simple as that. Business trade unionism is not going to win at the workplace. Business trade unionism has been a disaster. And I've got to understand that we've got a complete and open difference with business trade unionism. I've read some of these stories and I had the SEIU come and see me. By the way, just to give you an example, I'm not causing any trouble about the SEIU, but there's a person who's their European officer who was corruptly the General Secretary of a major union in Great Britain called Kevin Curran, who was thrown out of office because he had law firms ringing up people, members, to get support for him for the General Secretary position, and was corruptly thrown out of his union, is now the European officer for SEIU. And I had him and this girl come and see me, and they said, Bob, he said, we're from the Vienna office of the SEIU. And I thought to myself, that's not a state in America, they've only got 52 still, I don't know they have 53. And she said to me, we're over here organising workers in Europe and Great Britain. So I said, well, all due respect, I said, there's 260 million people in America and 90% are not in a union. Don't you think you should go back home first of all? And that's the real reality. Because as Jack said, solidarity starts at home. And the point is, I ain't met one union official, by the way, who doesn't agree with unity and solidarity. But the problem I've got, after seeing all these officers that say they like solidarity and unity, don't want to put it into practice. That's the real issue. Every meeting you go to the ITF, they'd be up there, solidarity forever, solidarity forever. Then you go and see them and say, what about a bit of support? Well, hang on a minute, because the attorneys are on our back, and they might take our cars off us, and we might have no expenses, and we might have to have 2 people sleep in the room rather than being in a suite in a hotel if we have these lawsuits against us. And we've got to understand what's taking place, because the reality is that the trade union movement will gain membership when it sees that its leadership is fighting. And any dispute that you win, you will gain members. And the trade union movement understand. You have to be honest with people. And the workers understand that you can't always win all the time. And workers will understand that sometimes the other side's a bit stronger than you. If you're walking down the road and there's 4 geezers on the other side that come over and attack you, sometimes you've got to duck, you've got to run sometimes. But what do? You wait for them to come down separately, then you do them in, one at a time. And that's the argument. That's the argument out there. And what we're seeing now is a massive attack taking place on trade unionism throughout the world. But also, what's got to understand is that trade unions 100 years ago in Great Britain understood that the Liberal Party wasn't carrying out policies for working people, and it set the Labour Party up. And 100 years on, we've got to do it all again. Because the fact is that you can have the Democratic Party, you can have the Republic Party, you can have the Conservative Party in Britain, the New Labour in Britain. They're both propping up each other. They all support the privatisation of the industries. They all support the keeping of the anti-trade union laws, and they all support globalisation. Now, by the way, globalisation could be a fantastic thing for all of us. If we had workers' globalisation, if we could say to those workers in Philippines, which Tony talked about, and said, you ain't going to be on $1 a day, you're going to be on the highest paid workers' pay and conditions in the world. If someone gets $500 a day for doing a job, and someone gets $1, globalisation could mean that we lift them up. But globalisation's about grinding people down. And also we've got to recognise is that under capitalism, it will boom and then it will go into a slump. And the booms will become shorter and the slumps will become deeper. And under capitalism, it means that society breaks down and it means it goes into wars. We're now facing a situation in Britain where the government wants to spend $150 billion on producing a new Trident nuclear weapon in America. At the same time, we had 25,000 pensioners, old age people, in the last 5 years dying of the cold. Now what do you want? Our pensioners to die of the cold, or do you want nuclear weapons? And our argument is we want to look after our pensioners and have decent hospital services and decent schools and decent education rather than weapons of mass destruction. I'm also sickened when people say that North Korea have tested a nuclear weapon. Well, I've got to say, I want to get rid of all nuclear weapons, whether they're in London, whether they're in Scotland, in North Korea, America, Israel. But I've got to say this. Why does Britain and USA say they want nuclear weapons? They say they want it for protection. Well, if it's good enough for the USA and Great Britain to have nuclear weapons, then why can't Korea have nuclear weapons to defend themselves in the same argument as people are saying in this country? That's the arguments that we should be putting up. But we want a different society. Because what it's about now is the extraction of profits from people. And I'll finish up my brothers and sisters in saying about privatisation. When I met Jack on the 15th of February 2002, two days previous I was in South Korea with the Korean Railway Federation fighting against the privatisation of their railways and giving examples of what took place in Britain. And 6 months after that, they was engaged in a massive struggle to defend the railways in Korea, South Korea, and that's why I was taking action yesterday, and a general strike is about to take place in a defence over there as well. And I had the opportunity, when people started talking about these wars, is to say to people quite simple what it's about. You have a public utility which provides a service. That public utility is then taken away from you, handed over to a small group of business people who then put the costs up of that utility to the consumer and then slash the paying conditions for the individuals that go there. That's what privatisation's all about. In Britain, we had an electricity board that was nationalised. We had a gas company that was nationalised. Even water in Britain is privatised as well. As someone once said, they privatised the rain in Great Britain. That's what they've done. But just to show you how madness is out there, because they said, we're against monopolies. That monopolies really make prices too high. I'll tell you what happened to me. I was at home one night and there was a knock on the door. It's the honest truth. It's the electricity man with his overalls on, with a clipboard in his hand. And he said, Mr. Crowe, I'm from the electricity board. I said, haven't I paid me bill? He said, no, he said, we want you to buy gas off us. I said, I thought you was from the electricity board. He said, no, he said, under the new laws, we're allowed to sell gas now because it's still owned by the government, but you basically have a franchise to sell gas from the government. I said, all due respect, I said, you're from the electricity board, I'd like to get my electricity from the electricity board, thank you very much. Slammed the door. Next night, honest truth, bang, bang on the door, it's the gas man. Bib and braces on, clipboard. He said, Mr. Crowe, I said, didn't you come here last night? He said, no, I'm from the gas board. He said, we're flogging electric. I said, do what? He said, we're flogging electric. I said, well, get away. I said, last night I had the electricity bloke flogging gas, now you're flogging electric. He said, well, under the new laws, he said, we can flog electric. I said, well, thanks very much, mate, but I'm going to keep to where it was. Now, a week later, bang, bang, bang on the door, a secondary electricity company, which is a subsidiary of the first electricity company, knocks on the door, overalls on, clipboard. Mr. Crowe, he said, I'm from the electricity board, we're flogging water. Now, when I went to school, I was told that water and electricity didn't mix. But I'll tell you what, it certainly mixes when they make profits. And that's the reality that we're in out there. And the position is this, brothers and sisters. I'm all in favour of looking back through history. And quite rightly, as Steve said, if you don't look back through history, you're doomed in the future. But also, there's nothing more boring than old soldiers talking about old battles. And what we need to do is the battles that are going to take place from 2006, 2007, and start saying to some of these union officials that it's all right going to International Transport Federation conferences, and it's all right going around the world and saying solidarity forever, but when you leave that conference room, remember that it's no good just saying solidarity forever in a conference room. You've got to practice what you preach. Instead of just showing your teeth to some local officials, you've got to show your teeth to the employers and start fighting. And that's the way we're going to win.